a presentation about paleo art in general, but I'm going to focus on basically my experience with paleo art because paleo art it's the idea of um, reconstructing through art, visual art, usually almost always, um, ancient prehistoric life. That's the most broad term. Um, Pictured here, if I don't know if anybody recognizes this museum, sadly, this exhibit is no longer there. This is from the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. And this is a mounted skeleton of the dinosaur Hadrosaurus falci, which was the first not bird dinosaur, first prehistoric dinosaur described by Western science from the United States of America. So it was discovered in the 1800s in New Jersey. And the bones, despite being found in New Jersey, the bones are held at the Academy. Um, and this is a project that I was hired to do in 2019. So I was hired to create a life-size depiction of a living Hadrosaurus to be displayed. And this is a weird one because I actually had to draw that directly onto the wall. This is not something that was scanned and blown up. I had to get a ladder with like a lot of chalk, and it took about 12 hours, maybe less than that, maybe like 10 hours over the course of 2 days. And that was up for about 5 years. And now, currently, I think that whole exhibit is gone and they've replaced it with something else. I don't know if they're going to put Hadrosaurus back up on display. They should. It's a very historically relevant piece, but I digress. So the point is, in my experience, I tend to do dinosaurs. But I'm going to be talking about I'm going to be talking about it from the perspective of someone who works with dinosaurs, because that's what I tend to work with. But just keep in mind, there's people that focus on fossil plants, fossil marine life, fossil mammals, fossil humans. Okay, so there's all kinds of different forms of paleo art out there. So I actually decided to just go on Wikipedia and look up what it said about paleo art, and this is what it said. So any original artistic work that attempts to depict prehistoric life according to scientific evidence, which is a fancy schmancy way of what I essentially just told you, typically defined as being scientifically informed, is often the basis of depictions of prehistoric animals in popular culture, which in turn influences public perception of and fuels interest in these organisms. Um, that's kind of a long way of saying in so many words that paleo art is extremely important. When you think of paleontology, you often think of the fossils themselves and the scientists who find them or publish them, study them. But if you think about it, if you hear about anytime you look up a paper, find a new, article, new dinosaur found, the first thing everybody wants to know is what does it look like, right? Or what did it look like, rather? Sometimes fossil animals are not based on complete skeletons, um, and paleontology would not be nearly as exciting as it is if it wasn't for our imaginations thinking about what these creatures looked like when they were alive. That's why we love dinosaurs, right? They're exciting animals. They're unlike anything alive today, truly. We have birds, but extinct dinosaurs are very different. And that's kind of what I think gives them an edge. Other prehistoric animals are cool too. Don't get me wrong. Prehistoric mammals are great. Mammoths are cool. Okay. But dinosaurs are so different. We don't have anything very close to them alive today, except for birds, which again are very different. So being able to look at these things, what they may have looked like, is why we are so drawn to them. No pun intended there. In a way, it's up to paleo artists to, we intentionally or not, we kind of control how the public perceives um, what these animals look like. Sometimes we get that wrong, and that's okay, and we're going to go into that. Um, but regardless, that sticks. If paleo art is prominent enough, if there's a piece of paleo art that's prominent enough, that tends to stick. And even if we find new evidence that supports something different, sometimes the public's perception stays that way. And I'm going to talk about some examples of that too. The picture here is the United States' second published dinosaur called Dryptosaurus. These are skeletons that are on display at the New Jersey State Museum in Trenton. And I was hired to do the backdrop for that, which is watercolor. That's more of a scene. you could see on the right there, does feature a Dryptosaurus. And that was blown up. So I painted that in watercolors and they made that large. And that is my 2-year-old daughter standing in front of it at the time. Um, so I'm kind of personally I'm very happy and proud of the fact that I was able to illustrate the backdrops of the first and second published dinosaurs from the United States of America, both of which were actually from New Jersey, which is where I was born and raised. I live in Maryland currently, but I spent most of my life, I was born in New Jersey and I lived there until I was in my 20s. So these are both very meaningful projects to me as a paleo artist. Um, so not paleo art. So when people think about dinosaurs, most people, especially if you're outside of the paleo community, their perception of dinosaurs is usually based on Jurassic Park. And Jurassic Park, the 1993 movie was mostly based on some fossil evidence. The second one was too. You could argue that all of them, there's 6 movies now. Currently, there's going to be a seventh this summer. They all try in some ways, varying degrees, to base their dinosaurs off of science. But at the end of the day, those movies were invented to entertain, not to educate. So despite the fact that, yes, there is some good science in those movies and there is value to those movies, aside from just being entertainment. But at the end of the day, they made choices that were actively against the science. Most obvious is the Dilophosaurus from the first movie, which is the one that had the retractable frill that could spit venom. They purposefully made that dinosaur look different from what the fossils tell us that it looked like to make that movie more exciting. And in the previous slide, when I said like depictions of these dinosaurs can kind of dictate how people view them, that movie came out in 1993. To this day, people still think Dilophosaurus had that frill and spit that venom. During my time working in museums, when we had Dilophosaurus skeletons on display, people would often say, "Oh, I don't recognize it. Oh, that's the one that spits venom." And then I'd have to explain, "No, it didn't, and it didn't have a frill." So that's how influential that depiction of that animal was. Godzilla obviously is a popular depiction of a version of a dinosaur. And then there's various cartoons and stuff like the Flintstones and whatnot. That's from a show called Primal, where they show dinosaurs and not necessarily the dinosaurs themselves being inaccurate physically, but they're in inaccurate situations, in this case, alongside human beings. So in order for something to be considered true paleo art, it has to be based on science first. These are 3 examples of things that are not paleo art. They are of dinosaurs, you could argue that, but they are not true paleo art. They're paleo themed, but they're not paleo art. So there's a distinct difference. They're still valuable. I love all 3 of these things. They're just not paleo art. That being said, let's look at one of the earliest known versions of paleo art that we could actually call paleo art. And that is a sculpture in Austria that was made in 1590 of a dragon. Uh, and it's hard to look at that sculpture and think, how is that possibly based on paleo art? But it actually is confirmed that it does count as true paleo art. That sculpture was created in response to them finding the skull on the right of this image here. And during that time, they didn't have the internet. You couldn't just get your iNaturalist out and snap a shot of a skull and find out what it was. You couldn't email your friend who knew somebody at the museum who worked with fossils. Nowadays, all I have to do, if I find a bone, I don't know what it is, I send a photo to one of my friends that knows more than me, and I know within seconds what it is. You can post it on Facebook. There's so many ways to access this stuff. Well, back then they didn't have that. So when they found a skull of an Ice Age rhino, they didn't recognize it was a rhino. In fact, some people in Austria during 1590 probably never saw a rhino. Most people never did. Some people maybe didn't even know what a rhino was. Um, so they did the best they could. They remember hearing of stories about monsters. There were certainly dragons in the Bible or whatever, various folklore. So they used what they knew and they kind of worked around what they had and they kind of filled in the gaps. And that's what paleo art is at its core. You work with what you have, the factual information, which is often fragmentary, and then you fill in the gaps the best you can with what you can, trying to stay logical every step of the way. There's always going to be imagination in there. But there's no way to avoid that. And in some ways, I kind of like that about paleo art. I enjoy being a paleo artist over being like a wildlife artist. If I was a wildlife artist and I was hired to paint an image of a bald eagle or something, um, I don't really have any wiggle room. Everybody knows what that animal's supposed to look like. But as a paleo artist, I can still make scientific illustrations, but I can use my imagination at the same time. It's kind of like the best of both worlds. I can have fun, I can be creative, I can express myself, but at the same time, I'm still being scientific. That's my favorite thing about paleo art, actually. That being said, while we're on the subject of dragons, a common um, thought, a trend maybe even, is the idea that I've heard this many times, maybe some of you have heard this, um, that there's cultures around the world all have their own version of a dragon. And therefore, uh, every single mythical creature, um, dragon, must be based on people finding dinosaur bones back then. That's a very popular idea. To this day, people say this all the time. Personally, and a lot of other people feel this way too, I don't think that's giving people from the past enough credit. Um, in the case of like that rhino skull, that is true because that's confirmed. There's written record of that and of that how that went down. But in the case of a lot of other mythical creatures, I don't think that's true. First of all, the word dragon is a Western word. It's an English word, and we tend to kind of apply it to monsters from cultures around the world. But if you actually stop and look at it logically, a dragon from, Norse culture, okay, or Welsh culture is a completely different mythical creature from a dragon from Chinese culture. Those are completely different creatures. They have almost nothing in common. Yet we just kind of blanket them as both dragons, and that sticks, and we're just like, oh yeah, they're both dragons. They're not. They're completely different animals, or made up animals. Um, if you look at the earliest depictions of dragons, they're composite animals. They're chimeras. They're made up of body parts of other animals that people know existed. The one on the top left is a great example. That's a dragon, but you can tell there's definitely a snake, there's bat, there's lion paws on it. Okay. Um, Even the Chinese dragon, the East Asian dragons, there's written descriptions of them, and they describe them, what they're supposed to look like. They're based on fish, tigers, deer, all kinds of different snakes. They outwardly say that when they're designing these dragons. So, yeah, I'm sure there are cases where mythical creatures were originally maybe inspired by fossils, but the majority of them probably were not. I think it was just good old human imagination. People were creative, just like they are now. And a logical thing to do would be to take, hey, wouldn't it be cool or interesting if we took parts from animals that we already knew and we created our own monster to represent something in a story or our culture? Um, Before I leave this topic, the image on the right is not of a dragon, it's of a creature called a griffin, which has the head and wings, sometimes the forelegs of an eagle, and the body of a lion. There's obviously variations because mythical creatures can look like whatever you want them to look like because they're made up. But one of the most popular ideas is that the myth of griffins are based on ceratopsian fossils, specifically a dinosaur called Protoceratops, which is essentially, it looks like a Triceratops, but about sheep-sized, and it didn't have horns. This is such a popular idea. It's so trendy. There's entire books that are based on this, but if you actually look at the factual information, it doesn't add up. Um, Protoceratops fossils are not from the same place that the first griffin myths are from. You could argue that maybe it was word of mouth, like maybe people from Mongolia found the fossils and brought them, traded with people from Greece or Mesopotamia, where the first griffin images show up in history. But that's a stretch. That in order to prove that, you'd need extraordinary evidence, which we don't have. And also, the griffin is very clearly eagle and lion, which are two very well-known animals thousands of years ago. So it makes sense that it's much more logical to assume that people just simply combine two popular animals as opposed to it based on an animal that doesn't really even look like it that much. Um, yeah, so those are examples of not paleo art, but they often get attention. Ironically, I would argue that the flip side is true for modern dragons, though. So if you look at modern depictions of dragons, if we have any Game of Thrones fans, that's Drogon on the right from the Game of Thrones show, and that's Smaug on the left from The Hobbit. Modern dragons are very much based on dinosaurs. When they design, I can, as a paleoartist and any paleontologist who works with dinosaurs can tell you, um, they were looking at paleoart of dinosaurs when they designed those dragons. So it's kind of ironic. The modern dragons are based on dinosaurs, but the ancient ones doesn't seem to be the case. So this is the most probably well-known historic example of paleo art. I don't feel it would be appropriate to do a presentation about paleo art if I did not include this story. So for those of you who are familiar with this, I hope I can teach you a little bit more information, details about it. For those of you who are not familiar with the story, you're in for a treat. This is the story of the dinosaurs that Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins designed. Um, in England in the 1800s, I want to say 1840s or 1830s, there was a guy by the name of Gideon Mantell and his wife, Marianne Mantell. They discovered some fossilized teeth that they did not recognize. They had never seen anything remotely similar to these teeth before. Um, they gave the teeth to some scientists. They were studied. They ended up finding Marianne, his wife, is the one who actually found the teeth originally. She's the original discoverer of these. Gideon kind of took the reins and ended up helping describe it, but Marianne, his wife, is the one who found them. Um, and they eventually named these bones and these teeth Iguanodon, which is a pretty popular dinosaur. Anybody who likes dinosaurs probably has heard of Iguanodon. They named it Iguanodon simply because the teeth themselves, despite being huge, they're about yay big, were the most similar to modern iguanas of the teeth that they have ever seen. Um, and they did not discover a full skeleton. They discovered some limb bones, some vertebra, and this odd spike-like object. Sadly, no skull yet. So, and this is again, this is during a time where we didn't know much about dinosaurs, if anything at all. There is, I think, only one dinosaur that was published before this, and I don't think we even knew it was a dinosaur yet. Um, so they did what any good scientist would do, is they filled in what they didn't know with the most logical pieces, the most logical fillers, and that is modern reptiles. They knew these bones were from a reptile, despite being huge, bigger than any reptile alive. Um, so years later, Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins, who was an artist, arguably one of the first paleo artists, he illustrated and sculpted these life-size sculptures of iguanodon alongside several other prehistoric animals. And these sculptures are still there. You can go to what's called the Crystal Palace. The palace itself is burned down, but the grounds are still there, not far outside of London, and see these. I went, about 10 years ago, and I got to see them. It's pretty cool. It was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, they're kind of wearing down a bit. They have to restore them. They're raising money to restore these guys, but they're really impressive to see. Um, so they made them look like big iguanas because that's the closest animal that they had at the time. They didn't have other dinosaurs yet. They didn't really know what a dinosaur was supposed to look like. Despite that, they still noticed that these were unique animals. If you look at the animal in the back that's standing up, what you might notice is that it's standing erect with its legs kind of straight under its body, similar to a mammal. Modern reptiles don't stand that way. Lizards have their little legs sprawled out to the side. Crocodiles and alligators kind of have a semi-sprawled posture. No reptile alive, other than birds technically, has posture like that. They were able to tell this animal was built like that from the bones that they had. So that alone not only was very accurate and impressive, despite a lot of this animal being outdated, but also for the time was very revolutionary. No one had ever heard of this. This is like an alien being discovered. That spiky part that I talked about earlier, again, they used the most logical explanation. Some lizards have horns on their noses. There's an iguana called a rhino iguana that has a horn on its nose. So they assumed that was a horn. It went on the nose. Logical explanation. This is great paleo art. Is it outdated by today's standards? Yes, but this is really good, accurate paleo art for the time. The reason why we now know it's outdated is not because the people back then were missing something. It's simply because since then we've discovered more fossils. And every time we discover new fossils, we fill in more gaps and we learn more. Paleontology is a rapidly evolving field. One discovery can completely turn everything on its head, especially when it comes to the appearance of certain animals. Um, Later on in Belgium, they found like dozens of full articulated skeletons of dinosaurs, um, which were very similar to this iguanodon. Um, so that was able to kind of update what we knew these animals looked like. And interestingly enough, as even more bones were discovered, um, the name changed as well. So we all know iguanodon, but that actually was given to the skeletons that were discovered in Belgium years later because they were so much more complete. It was later discovered that the bones that were discovered in England were actually from a similar but different species of dinosaurs. So they renamed the English specimen to Mantellosaurus after the Mantels who originally discovered it. And this is what it looked like, according to more accurate, more up-to-date information about it. So that horn was not a horn at all. They only found one of them, but when they found articulated skeletons, and by articulate I mean that the bones are together in the the form of the animal, um, that was actually a thumb spike, and they had one on each hand. So Iguanodon and Mantellosaurus, they had a beak at the tip of their mouth. They would have been able to walk on their hind legs. They could also drop down to all fours if they had to. They had five fingers on each hand, which is weird. The digits two, three, and four were kind of fused together to form like a hoof. Digit one was a pointy spike, and digit five was a flexible kind of pinky finger that they may have been able to use to like manipulate food. There's a lot we still don't know. But yeah, this is a beautiful example of us humans finding limited fossils, applying what they know, doing the best they can, and then updating their image of these animals as we discover more fossils. The same artist, Waterhouse, he went on to do illustrations of other dinosaurs. And as they discovered new things, he applied those new things. So if you notice, the dinosaurs in this illustration, which he did, are walking on their hind legs, which is even more outlandish by those standards. Um, than them walking upright. And these are illustrations of the first two dinosaurs that I actually showed you, Hadrosaurus and Dryptosaurus. So Hadrosaurus is that like conga line of like greenish dinosaurs on the right side of the island, and Dryptosaurus, the tyrannosaur related to T-Rex actually, is the reddish colored dinosaur that's like eating them and chasing them. Another thing that I like about this artist is he's one of the first guys to actually not only reconstruct the animals themselves, but the environment in which they lived in, kind of fully immersing you in their world. What it would have been like if you went into a time machine, went back there and not just saw the animals, but saw the plants, saw the water, saw the sky, all what the whole landscape would have looked like back then. So, um, so I talked to you about a dinosaur that we knew a little bit about, and now we know a little bit more about, but we still don't know a whole lot about. In fact, most dinosaurs we really don't know that much about. There's only so much you can gather from a skeleton, and that's assuming we have a full skeleton. Vast majority of dinosaurs are not found with a full skeleton. It's quite rare. Um, and even if you have a full skeleton, there's so many things you don't know. Color, we don't know what color dinosaurs are for the most part. We don't know how they behaved. We don't know what they ate unless we find their last meal in their stomach cavity. All those things are really rare, really lucky things to figure out. Um, I'm about to tell you about a dinosaur that we actually do know those things about, which is pretty amazing. Yes, including the color. So we do know the colors of some dinosaurs now. That used to be something we never were able to know. When I was growing up, all my dinosaur books and all my documentaries about dinosaurs, they said, we can only have the bones. We'll never know what color they are. When you're coloring your dinosaurs, you can make whatever color you like because we'll never know. Well, In some cases, we actually do know. It's pretty amazing. So this is a skeleton of a dinosaur called Microraptor. Microraptor is a relative of Velociraptor. It's a bit smaller than Velociraptor. It's about the size of a crow. Um, it was discovered in China, and it's actually known from many different specimens. So, where some dinosaurs we only have like partial skeleton of maybe one individual if we're lucky, these guys we have full skeletons of many individuals. And not only do we have the skeletons, but Microraptor in many cases died under conditions. Usually, we think it probably died in like a lagoon or a swamp, where its body was covered in silt rapidly, uh, in an environment where not only did the bones preserve, but some of the soft bits also preserved, like feathers. So you can see them in this fossil. There are black markings that are the feathers. You can see the feathers that would have been around the neck, the top of the head, the wings. We have specimens of Microraptor where we have the feathers at the tip of the tail. So we know that they had a fan like modern birds have at the tip of the tail. And it had two like ornamental, like pheasant-like feathers coming out of the tip of the tail, which is pretty cool. The weirdest thing, if that wasn't unusual and amazing enough, about Microraptor is it also had, you can see them, really long feathers growing out of its legs and its feet, its metatarsals, the foot bone. The feathers that are growing out of its feet are the same kinds of feathers that are growing out of its wings. And we've never seen that before, not in a wild occurring bird. There are some like domestic chickens and domestic doves that have like kind of long feathers on their feet, but we bred them to be like that. And even them, they don't have feathers that are that long. This is an animal that evolved naturally that trait. And I remember I was in eighth grade when this dinosaur was published, and it was mind-boggling. They called it the biplane dinosaur because it had wings where its arms were, but it also had wings on its feet. And that was just so strange. That everyone was racking their brain. Why did this animal have four wings? We're pretty sure it was at least gliding. There's some evidence to suggest it may have even been capable of powered flight, which is even more interesting considering the fact that this dinosaur is not a direct ancestor of modern birds. Birds are true dinosaurs, and they did come from a dinosaur that's probably similar to Microraptor, but Microraptor's lineage was separate, was like a sister group to modern birds. So the flight via feathers may have evolved more than one time in dinosaurs. Um, Years later, I want to say in like around 2010, they decided to look at these feathers under a high-powered microscope. And they were able to see that some of the cells were still preserved, or the outlines of some of the cells were still preserved. And some of those cells had organelles in them called melanosomes. Melanosomes are organelles in a cell that show the pigment of the cell that they're on, usually feathers and scales. So while we can't tell the color looking at the fossil with our naked eye, what we can do is we can look at the melanosomes, observe what shape it is, because the color that the feather is determined by the shape of the melanosome. And then what we would do is we would compare those melanosomes to the melanosomes of modern bird feathers under a microscope until we find a match. And that's exactly what they did. And they did find a match. And what's kind of neat is like your gut instinct, if you're gonna like predict what color a dinosaur was, like part of you wants to make them bright colored, right? But part of you's like, let's be conservative. Let's make them camouflaged. Let's make them brown. And even myself, I painted a Microraptor before this, and I made mine brown, like an owl. Um, that's not what these feathers were. The match was actually birds like grackles and starlings and various species of duck, all of which have dark feathers, but they're highly iridescent. So when they're in the sun, you see beautiful purples and blues and greens. Um, exact match, no question. There's other kinds. There's like the flat black color is a different shade. This was iridescent, like bluish black. So we know that Microraptor, the feathers that were covering most of this dinosaur's body were that of like a modern grackle, which is pretty exciting. So now if you look up images of Microraptor, anything that was painted, created after like 2010, they all have to be this color in order to be considered scientifically accurate. So this is my painting of it, of what it most likely looked like. So not very little of this is guesswork. So earlier I was talking about like how I have to use my imagination and there's creativity. There's very little involved here. Pretty much everything about this dinosaur, except for maybe the skin around its eyes and its nose, we kind of know what it looked like. But it doesn't stop there. Not only do we know what color it was, but we actually know a major thing about its behavior too. And it's thanks to what we know about its color. If you think about it, why are birds iridescent? Mostly to communicate with each other. Birds, they can see colors differently than we can see. They have more different arrangement of cones in their eyes. So when you're outside and you're looking at a grackle and you kind of see, oh, it's a shiny bluish purple if the sun hits it. When a grackle's looking at another grackle, those colors are amplified. They're seeing a lot brighter, more vivid, sometimes even different colors. So they use that iridescence to communicate with one another. And that only works if there's light. So what does that mean? It means that Microraptor was not nocturnal. We could rule that out. And originally that was a hypothesis. Oh, maybe this little small feathered dinosaur was nocturnal. It was coming out at night, hunting little insects like an owl. No, if this animal had iridescent feathers, it couldn't have been nocturnal. There's no point in a nocturnal animal evolving iridescent feathers. If you look at birds alive today that have that trait, none of them are active at night. Crows, ravens, grackles, starlings, ducks, all those birds are out during the day because that's when they're showing off those colors to each other. Okay. Um, so that's a major piece of behavior that we can tell about this animal that's been extinct since the early Cretaceous period, which is pretty impressive. Really, really cool. One of my favorite paleo art stories to tell. Um, so that's in China. Let's come back to the United States. Let's talk about Maryland. Because Maryland has dinosaurs. We got a lot, actually. Maryland is one of the most dinosaur-dense states in the country. It's certainly, as far as I know, it's the most dinosaur-dense state on the East Coast. Usually, when you think about dinosaurs, you think about like Colorado or the Dakotas. But Maryland is actually, especially in recent years, since like 2023, is actually coming up as a very prominent dinosaur site. Um, we're going to start with Astrodon. Astrodon is Maryland's official state dinosaur. It was named the state dinosaur in 1998. We've known about Astrodon since the early 1900s, I think like 1901 or something like that. Originally, it was only known from teeth. That's how it got its name, star tooth. If you take a, they didn't even know what kind of dinosaur it was at the time. They just knew it was a big reptile. Iguanodon and Hadrosaurus and Driposaurus were still very new, so they kind of knew it was a dinosaur. Um, and it wasn't until years later that they found more of Astrodon and more of other dinosaurs out west to compare it to that we knew that it was a sauropod, which are like the classic long neck plant-eating dinosaurs. Um, so Astrodon, currently we actually have pretty good material from. We have an almost complete skeleton from a juvenile, like a pony-sized juvenile. It's on display at the Maryland Science Center in Baltimore. And we also have not a full skeleton. Adult sauropod skeletons are very rare with regards to completeness. You usually only find, if you think about it, the bigger the animal, the less likely the whole body's going to preserve. Usually what happens, the animal dies, it gets scavenged, the river comes, washes the body parts all over the place. You're lucky if you're going to find more than half of a sauropod skeleton. But what we do have is pretty impressive. At the dinosaur site where I work, we have a cutout, a life-size cutout of this dinosaur's femur, which is about the size of a couch. So, and I think the real femur is also on display in Baltimore. So that's neat. That's Astrodon. That's probably the most famous dinosaur from this state. Um, Opposite end of the size spectrum, there's this little guy named Aquilops. Aquilops was tiny. So while Astrodon was about 70 feet long. Oh, by the way, all the dinosaurs I'm about to show you, the next five, all coexisted. They're all from the same bone bed. So all these guys would have been neighbors in the same habitat. So while Astrodon was about 70 feet long from nose to tail, roughly, this little guy was about the size of a Yorkshire Terrier. I would be able to hold it with like two hands, put it in a purse or something. Um, it's called Aquilops, which means eagle face because it has a downturned, hooked beak and like a very furrow brow. It had these brow ridges on its skull and very large eye sockets, making it superficially look like an eagle. Um, if you examine this animal's skull more closely, what you will realize is it is in fact not really that close related to birds. It's related to another kind of dinosaur that's very famous. It's just hard to tell because this guy's so small. Um, it has a curved beak, plant-eating teeth. It has a bony ridge growing out of the back of its head, and its cheekbones, called jugals, are beginning to evolve out into horn-like structures. This is an early member of the ceratopsian group, so the group that would later become Triceratops and all of its relatives. Aquilops is about 115 million years old. Triceratops, which is the last ceratopsian, very end of the dinosaur age, is about 66 million years old. So there's good reason to think that Aquilops may have even been the direct ancestor of the large SUV-sized horned dinosaurs. Um, we have meat eaters. We have a very large meat eater in Maryland called Acrocanthosaurus. Acrocanthosaurus is actually pretty widespread. There's Acrocanthosaurus fossils out west as well. In fact, most of what we know about this dinosaur is from material out west. But we have enough bones from Acrocanthosaurus and Aquilops in Maryland that we can match it up and we know that this is the same dinosaur, at least so far as we can tell. The age is the same, and the bones that we have are the same. Acrocanthosaurus was about 38 feet long, which is almost as big as Tyrannosaurus Rex, which is about 42 feet long. Um, it was not related to T-Rex. It was not a tyrannosaur. It was more closely related to Allosaurus, if you're familiar with Allosaurus. It was very closely related to like Giganotosaurus and Carcharodontosaurus, if you're familiar with those two. Um, it was not at all closely related to T-Rex. Completely different groups of theropods. T-Rex is actually more closely related to like a penguin or any other bird than it is to Acrocanthosaurus or Allosaurus for that matter. Um, its teeth were very blade-like and serrated on both ends. This is designed for slashing. So while Tyrannosaurus Rex was designed for pulverizing and crushing, it had very steak or banana-shaped teeth. This guy's teeth were like knives. So not crushing, but just slicing and applying like wounds that would make the prey bleed. It also had this cool ridge running down the length of its starting at the back of the skull that went all the way down the back, down the tail. We don't know why it had that. Maybe display within the species, but it had like a cool hump-like appearance in life. Uh, and then we have a raptor in Maryland called Deinonychus. Deinonychus is a very famous dinosaur. The velociraptors in Jurassic Park, despite being called Velociraptor, are really based on Deinonychus. Um, Deinonychus was about the size of a human, you could say a petite adult human, about maybe 11 feet long from nose to tail. But keep in mind that about half of that length is tail. So I'm about 5'9". So a Deinonychus could like kind of, if it reached up on its tiptoes, it could look at me right in the face, which is pretty terrifying. Um, these are the dinosaurs that had the killer claw. They had a retractable claw on the second digit of each foot that they would keep off the ground. And when they wanted to use it for hunting, those claws would flip forward. Um, in the movies, they show them slashing. Those claws appear to be more for piercing and gripping, very much like modern eagles and hawks and owls. What's cool is at the Maryland site, we find a lot of baby Deinonychus teeth, tiny little baby Deinonychus teeth. You almost need not a micro, a magnifying glass to look at them properly, which is pretty exciting. And there's studies that are done on Deinonychus teeth that show that the wear on the teeth is different from the adults, which tells us that they were eating different foods. So while the adults may have parents were probably still taking care of the babies. If they're anything like modern birds and crocodiles, the two most close relatives to these guys, mom and dad, or maybe just mom, I don't know, were still probably watching the babies, but the babies were likely hunting on their own. So while the adults were probably hunting larger prey, the babies may have been going after little bugs, little tiny mammals, and that's similar to like alligators do this today. The baby mom doesn't feed the baby; she guards the babies, but the babies find their own food. And also modern birds that walk on the ground, like chickens and turkey and ducks. Mom will take care of the babies, but they're on their own with finding food. So it's unlike songbirds that you see the mom feeding the babies. So that's a pretty interesting thing. It gives us a little window. I painted this with that in mind. So I have an adult, two little babies on either side of her. She's watching them, she's protecting them. But as you can see, one of the babies is about to pounce on a little mammal. So again, paleo art isn't just about showing what the animal looked like. I also want to show you how it may have acted based on science. And I also want to tell you like a story. I want to immerse you, I want to entertain you. But again, it's all based on science. It's an interesting, unique kind of profession. The last dinosaur that I want to talk about from Maryland is called Preconodon. Preconodon is really neat because it's exclusive to Maryland. We've not found any Preconodon fossils outside of the state of Maryland. It probably did exist because dinosaurs, I don't think, cared about state lines that were invented millions of years after they died. But so far, we only have Preconodon at this site. Preconodon was an ankylosaur, so it was an armored dinosaur. It had big chunks of bone growing out of its skin that probably were for protection. What's cool about Preconodon is originally we only had teeth for a very long time. We could tell from the teeth that it was definitely an ankylosaur, but we couldn't tell much beyond that, other than the fact that these teeth, if you hold them up to other ankylosaur teeth, even the biggest known ankylosaurs, Preconodon dwarfs them. So the picture on the lower left is me holding a Preconodon tooth up against the skull of a related ankylosaur that in life would have been about 22 feet long. And as you can see, Preconodon's tooth, which is a darker gray color, is about double, maybe even more, the size of that tooth. So either Preconodon just happened to have huge teeth, or Preconodon may have been able to grow over 40 feet long, which is by a long shot the largest armored dinosaur ever known to science. And it's only found in Maryland. Later on, in 2023, if you look at the upper left photo, we started finding bones from this dinosaur, including a gigantic vertebra from the tail, which is what that is. They're one of so your vertebra, your backbones, the center part, which is that round part, and then there's processes that grow out of the sides. One of the processes on the left side has been broken off, so that's what you're looking at. So you're looking at the center of the tail and the like a cross section. This vertebra supports the idea that this dinosaur was huge. So this is by a long shot, likely. Maybe we'll find more that says otherwise. One of the largest armored dinosaur known to science, which is pretty exciting. Again, as a paleo artist, I wanted to give you a sense of size. So how do I depict that in an animal no one's ever seen alive before? I can't put a human standing next to it and have it being scientifically accurate. So what I did is I took Deinonychus, which we know is about human size, and I put those guys in the foreground to show you, oh, okay, if you have the if you look at this painting, even if you don't know what a Deinonychus is, most viewers are going to identify with the animals in the foreground looking at this giant behemoth coming out of the swamp. You can't help but kind of immerse yourself, which kind of gives you a sense of, oh, this thing was huge. That's a trick that we do as artists when we're working with animals that no one's ever seen alive. Um, so yeah, that's Maryland dinosaurs. So speaking of Maryland, at the Natural History Society, I was hired to paint an animal for them, but it was only based on footprints. So not only did I not have any bones to work with, which is challenging enough or interesting enough it is, I literally just had footprints. So how do you do that? The footprints themselves, when you find fossil footprints, they have names. So if you don't have any bones associated with the prints, you have to give the prints their own name. So the footprints themselves are called Atreapus. Um, they were discovered in Frederick County, and they're about 200 million years old. So this is the late Triassic. So the other animals that I'm showing you, this is the early Cretaceous, about 115 million years ago. This is 200 million years ago, much older. Um, and the identity of these footprints is still kind of debated. Most experts have whittled it down to one of two candidates. For a long time, they thought it was a small ornithischian dinosaur. Ornithischian dinosaurs is the major group of dinosaurs that includes the duckbills, iguanodon, triceratops, plant-eating dinosaurs on that half of the dinosaur family tree. During the Triassic, we know very little about ornithischian dinosaurs. We have theropods, meat-eating dinosaurs from the Triassic, but we have very, very few, if any, plant-eating dinosaurs from this time period that are ornithischians. In fact, as more information was coming out, it was actually looking like the few ornithischian dinosaurs that we did have from the, excuse me, from the Triassic turned out to actually be from the early Jurassic. Um, so maybe this wasn't an ornithischian dinosaur, or maybe it was. Uh, Stick with me here. There's another kind of reptile from the Triassic called a silosaur. Silosaurs historically were thought to be related to dinosaurs, but not true dinosaurs themselves. They have a number of characteristics that they share with dinosaurs, like the upright posture, but they have some features about their skeletons, like their hips, that are distinct from other dinosaurs. However, they line up perfectly with a spot that would be the ornithischian dinosaurs in the Triassic. And they have a number of characteristics in common with ornithischian dinosaurs that nothing else has. They even had a little beak in the front of their mouth. Um, so there is a camp of experts who think that silosaurs actually were the direct ancestors of ornithischian dinosaurs and should actually be considered true dinosaurs themselves, even though they, for a long time, were not. And this is still debated. Uh, so I talked to a paleontologist, Paul Olson, who's an expert on silosaurs and these tracks. He personally is not convinced yet, but there's a number of other paleontologists who are. It's an ongoing conversation. Regardless of the identity of this animal, it appears that the tracks are from this creature, because the feet match up almost perfectly with it. The you can see on the picture on the left here, there's the larger foot on the bottom with three toes, and then there's the little tiny forelimb in the front, which is very concentrated and very small. And the key characteristic is the last digit, the last finger, doesn't touch the ground. There's no evidence of the last digit. And that's something that's unique to silosaurs. An ornithischian dinosaur, like the one pictured at the bottom of this page, you could see the front limbs, the pinky finger is longer. And if the hand was in the mud, you would be able to see that little pinky finger. But with silosaurs, you would not. Um, so I ultimately decided to go with a silosaur for this illustration. Here's the original sketch that I sent to Bronwyn. So even though we don't have any bones, I had to do my best research to kind of uh, convey what we're looking at here. So I made a point to include the tracks in the sketch, because what's the point of depicting this animal if I'm not even include the tracks that we're basing it on? Um, I included plants that were from that time period. And earlier I did say that despite the fact that I use science and try to be as logical as possible, you still can are allowed to have fun. So I went with a nice reddish color on the face, which is a very common display adaptation for modern birds and reptiles. A goldish brown, yellowish on the back with little dark spots, and black and white striped tail alternating, which are all very common color schemes in modern animals, especially birds and reptiles, which also happen to coincidentally be very similar to the Maryland flag. Just saying. So it kind of works both ways. That was approved. So then I painted the final product, which is what you see here. And this is done with watercolors. Also, you notice this animal has feathers. Um, so feathers actually go way far back in the dinosaur family tree. So not only did some theropods have feathers, but we actually know that the pterosaurs, which are not dinosaurs, pterodactyl, they're commonly called, have a fuzzy coat on their body. We have fossils of them that show this. Um, that fuzz that pterosaurs have was determined to actually be a kind of feather. So either feathers evolved separate times, which is unlikely, or the common ancestor between pterosaurs and dinosaurs, which are related, had them. So the question that people used to ask is, oh, which dinosaurs evolved feathers? But the more accurate question is, which dinosaurs evolved out of feathers? So it seems that the ancestral trait for dinosaurs is feathers. And then certain groups evolved to not have feathers. So since this animal is such an early dinosaur or dinosaur relative, it likely would have had feathers, even though there's no direct evidence of feathers, let alone on a footprint. So that's our little Atrapus or Silosaur. So I believe I went a little over. I apologize, but we have a couple minutes for questions, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Why don't you unshare, come back, I'll put the spotlight back on you. We'll open it up for questions. If you have a question,
Sure.
raise your hand or put it in the chat box. And we can do that. First of all, thank you. That was amazing. I love it.
Thank you.
Yes, yep. All right.
Oh yeah.
Who has
So
a
okay, there's a question on there.
okay.
So Karen, did you research the kind of insect? Yes. So that is a scorpion fly, and we have fossils of scorpion flies from the exact place that Microraptor was found. So that was also researched. Yes.
Are you going to publish a book of your paintings, or how can we get one of your paintings? Kristen asked.
Um, I sell prints. I have a print store. I can put a link to my website in the chat here. Um, I also sell originals. So if you feel like spending more money, I am not opposed to selling originals. If not, I sell prints on an online store. So that's always a thing. And I will link that here. If the store, I'll be real with you, I have not updated it in a while. Um, so if you look at the store and you don't see the painting that you want, email me and I will make that work for you. I will make it available. Oh, there's the link to the online store.
Alan has a question. Go ahead, Alan.
Hi, great. Thank you so much. So I usually ask like what got you interested, but I'll also combine that with did you come at it from art first or from
Mm.
interest in dinosaurs first, or how did the two come together? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was exactly the same. I think it was both exactly equal. So I was I was a dinosaur obsessed child since I was two. That's all I did was think about and talk about dinosaurs. Um, so there's that. And then I was also really into art. So I was drawing from when I was a tiny, tiny little kid. My mother is also an artist. And so was both my grandmothers. I was very fortunate enough to have parents that nurtured that. So I was actually going to art lessons after school since I was a little kid. Yeah.
And
So
how did
both.
you like people
My
find? Oh, sorry.
so my formal degree is in science. So I didn't go to college for art. I went to college for animal science and I have a degree in animal
Ah,
science.
okay.
Yeah.
How did people find out about you, the art, or how did you find them? And
Sorry?
so like when you talk about your work was displayed like in that one exhibit,
Oh yeah.
how do they find you? How do you find them?
Honestly, I wish I'm very aggressive. So some paleo art's it's very niche, right? But it's also very competitive because everybody like who doesn't want to draw dinosaurs for, and I can't even say for a living because I don't, it's a side job. I work full time as a teacher, right? But some people do it full time, full-time illustrators. That's hard enough as it is, right? Just being an artist full time. So now you're taking that and you're narrowing it down to just dinosaurs. So you can imagine how competitive that is. There are some paleo artists out there who, as far as I can tell, unless they're lying, I don't think they are, they're prominent. They have people coming to them. I don't know what their secret is. Sometimes I get people coming to me for that. Like, so for instance, the job here at the Natural History Society, I got through my job at the fossil site. So, my coworker JP at the fossil site, JP Hodnet, he knew I was a paleo artist, and he said, "Oh, they need a painting at the society," so they put me in contact. So a lot of it's networking. You know, my dad often says it's important to be smart. It's important to be professional, but in life it's mostly about who you know. And that rings true. Sometimes it just that's what it is. Your people skills and your ability to network is just as important as your actual ability as an artist. With regards to the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philly, I reached out to them because I knew this is a thing that they would have needed. I sometimes I research museums and I see which museums are doing renovations and I try to get in there as soon as I can. Sometimes I'm too late because they don't tell you they're doing renovations sometimes until they already hired an artist. So I told them and they said no, and they went with somebody else. And then the year later, I emailed them again. And I was relentless. And I emailed them sketches and even more stuff. And I pitched it to them. And that convinced them. And then they took me. The job at the New Jersey State Museum was, again, through someone. So I was already friends with one of the paleontologists who worked at that museum. And he knew that I was interested. So the second that opened up, he reached out to me all the time. So the biggest way that I do this is just through who I know. I network and I don't do it from a personal gain aspect. I don't want these people to think that I genuinely have good relationships with these people. Um, but they know that I'm interested in these things. So when thing does present itself, if I'm lucky, I'm the first person that comes to mind.
So if anybody needs a dinosaur drawn, you know who to contact. You have you know a guy now. You know a guy. I know a guy. I know a guy who could do that. A question is, you take so much with your scientific background and understanding evolution and animals and comparative anatomy and all of those different things that you're taking in and the natural history of animals to create as real pictures of what we don't know to know. I mean, how do we know that if we're looking at paleo art, if it's good or it's bad or it's like I'm like, oh, this is a picture of
Yeah,
such and such. I'm going to put it on here and
right.
say
Yeah,
that that's
no.
somebody else will say no, that's completely wrong.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I think Uh, one of the coolest things about paleo art, in my opinion, is actually I'll take that and I'll flip it on you, is the fact that you can have, take a Tyrannosaurus Rex, right? You can have like five completely different looking depictions of Tyrannosaurus Rex by different people, but they can all still be completely up to date because the artist just chose different things, right? So like maybe this artist chose to do Tyrannosaurus's face with more crocodilian influence, with the teeth sticking out and no feathers, which is possible. Well, this artist over here chose to give Tyrannosaurus Rex like the reptile equivalent of lips. So when its mouth is closed, you don't see the teeth. And maybe they did give it some feathers because Tyrannosaurus Rex was very close related to birds, so it would be logical to assume it may have had feathers. Those are two very different looking depictions of the same exact animal, yet I would argue that they're both valid. Um, there are times where like I guess I could look at a drawing of a dinosaur and say, that's kind of, the wrists don't would not be able to physically bend that way. The bones just don't allow it. Or sometimes the environment's wrong. Like if sometimes people, I've done it myself. I've accidentally put two animals interacting that actually were separated by millions of years. Uh, Common, and this is not their, no, it kind of is. That famous Fantasia, The Rite of Spring, right, is famous for having Tyrannosaurus Rex fighting a Stegosaurus, and they were separated by like 50 million years. They never would have met. So that would be an example of, I would not consider that piece true paleo art. Even though I feel like those depictions of dinosaurs are beautiful and very accurate for the time. Um, I think they knew enough about those animals at the time that they would not have been able to coexist, but they wanted to put all these different animals in the same animation together, so they chose to do that. So that I would dock and consider it not true paleo art, despite being a beautiful piece of art. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Jason did put in here a question. What I think it was when you were showing the Maryland dinosaurs, what the landscape looked like here back then.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great question. We know a lot about the landscape. The fossil site itself, we often joke because the fossil site is called Dinosaur Park. Um, but we joke it accurately it should be called Tree Park because most of what we find are tree fossils. So the way we often describe it is imagine if you were to combine the redwood forest in California with the Everglades. That's essentially what it kind of looked like based on what we have. So it was like a wet, possibly brackish, slow moving river or marshy environment with huge redwood type trees. Not true modern redwoods by today's standards, but they would have been in that family. That's kind of the best way I could describe it. If you go to that site, if you go to the dinosaur park, we have a mural on display of the landscape to get a good idea of what it looked like.
Why you? I was a little bit surprised when you said that Maryland is like the hot spot for dinosaurs. Is there
That's on
a
the East Coast.
geologic on the East Coast? Is there a geologic reason why, or
I
understanding
don't
why?
Yeah, so I don't think it's a geological reason. I think it's a luck reason. So I think so like New Jersey is also very has a lot of fossil sites, but it's so highly developed that there's fossils, there would have been fossils under there, but they would have been built over and we don't have it. We don't have them anymore. Okay. Maryland, that we were very lucky in the site that used to be an iron mine, they started finding dinosaur bones. And they were very lucky that they preserved that space. And if you go to the site, it's funny. Like when you think of dinosaur fossil sites, you think of like a place in the middle of nowhere out in the desert. This is like down like a suburban road. There's like a kava next door to it and like a warehouse, and there's a trampoline park. So it's not a typical, it's not a typical site, and that's been built around it. So that used to be more rural. But because we preserved that space, because we recognized the value there, that area where the fossils were found was kept. Whereas I feel like in places elsewhere on the East Coast, we just don't realize it until it's too late, and that's not the case. The reason why we find the West is associated with dinosaurs is not because there were more dinosaurs there, it's just because it's less developed. So there's more undeveloped land to find dinosaurs on.
Okay. And but you did mention that we had a high diversity of dinosaurs.
Yeah, as far unless I'm wrong, and someone can correct me, as far as I know, I think Maryland has the most dinosaur diversity on the East Coast, at
I
least for
find
one
that
site, for sure. It's the
Can't
only
say that
dinosaur bone
word.
bed on the East Coast, that's
Can't
for
say
sure.
that word diverse.
The highest diversity of different dinosaurs in one place. Um, yeah. It's the only true dinosaur bone bed on the East Coast, that's for sure. And so by bone bed, we mean place where we're finding dinosaur remains on top of each other. Um, and we didn't know it was a true bone bed until 2023. It's very exciting.
If you wanted to become a paleo artist, what are some of the what would be your tips or guidelines or guidance that you would give somebody
Yeah.
who's an aspiring paleo artist?
Yeah. So there's so many different ways to approach it. Um, you could start, I know some people that like to go to museums and they like to sketch based off of skeletons that they see. Um, I know some people, and this is a very common way to start, and there's no shame in it. Some people feel like it's not, it doesn't count, but I think it does. When you're learning how to draw, there's no shame in copying existing pieces as long as you give credit where it's due, right? It would be wrong for you to copy someone else's piece and then say it was, not mentioned it and try to publish it somewhere. But if you're practicing, try to become a better artist and copy stuff that you are inspired by. Every artist worth their salt has done that. Me personally, it's probably because of my background with living animals. Um I like to look at real animals, and I try to apply the prehistoric animals to them to like so I try to be inspired by them, and that can take the form of like color patterns. I don't like to do direct color patterns. I don't like to do like exact color patterns of modern animals onto dinosaurs, but like little bits and pieces, behavior, composition. um an example would be when I used to work at the zoo. uh, well, one of the animals I worked with was a sloth. And he, at first, what does a sloth have to do with dinosaurs? They're so different. Stay with me. This sloth, we were feeding him some greens and stuff. And I remember he had a piece of lettuce in his little claw, and he was hanging upside down. He was taking bites out of this lettuce, and then he just, in very sloth fashion, he just kind of fell asleep, just like hanging upside down with the lettuce in his claw still. And then, like hours later, I happened to walk by and I watched him wake up and said, "Ooh, free lettuce," and he kept eating it. And that stuck with me. So then I did a painting of a dinosaur called Therizinosaurus, which is kind of sloth-like in a way. They have big claws. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be neat if, because this is a plant-eating dinosaur, if I did this animal, it had a branch in its claw that it was munching on, and then it just kind of fell asleep with the branch in its claw. And that's what I ended up doing. So although the dinosaur itself is not very sloth-like physically, and maybe didn't behave like a sloth. This dinosaur was 30 feet long, certainly wasn't living in trees. That little tiny snippet of behavior I could apply to it and still be considered plausible.
Elliot asked,
Um,
are there any other examples of fossilized behavior?
yeah, there's a lot. There's so much. Where to start? If I could be here all night if I gave you everyone I knew. We have examples of communal nesting, which is pretty cool. Maiasaura, the duckbill dinosaur, that's a very famous example. So they found nests, dinosaur nests with eggs in the middle of it, like multiple of them, all kind of set like exactly, I think, like 10 or so feet away from each other, maybe 20 feet. Um, which is kind of what you see in like seabirds today. So it's likely all these mothers and maybe dads too, I'm not sure, got together and all lived there at the same time and all guarded their eggs and took care of their babies at the same time. We know they were taking care of the babies because they found babies in the nest that were not hatchlings. So what it means is the babies hatched and they stayed. So someone was feeding them, right? Um, we have examples, we have evidence of hunting behavior. Tyrannosaurus Rex, we know, was at least trying to kill other dinosaurs because we have a bite wound on a duckbill that matches a T-Rex jaw that healed. So if it healed, it means that the animal survived, right? If it was just we find chew marks on bones all the time. We can't tell if the predator killed it or if they scavenged it. But if we found a wound that healed, well, that means that the predator failed in that case. So it at least was trying to hunt. Um, a lot of parental behavior. Oviraptorosaurs, if you know those guys, the theropod dinosaurs, kind of cassowary like. There is a skeleton of a parent that actually died brooding over a nest. So it's on display at the New York Museum, the American Museum of Natural History. So the poor parent, a sandstorm came and this dinosaur got on top of the nest. The eggs were arranged in a ring, so they laid their eggs in a ring because the parent would have been too heavy to sit on them. And the dinosaur's feet were in the middle of the ring and they were crouched over with the arms out to the sides like this over the eggs. So that tells us how they were behaving. It also proves, almost proves, I couldn't say it definitely proves, but almost certainly proves that dinosaur had feathers as well. Because if the animal was putting its arms over the eggs like this, they're still exposed unless it had wings, feathers on the wings. And it is the kind of dinosaur that is closely related to birds. And we have found other oviraptorosaurs that did preserve feathers. So that's a behavior that also tells us what the animal looked like just from bones. Those are a couple of examples off the top of my head.
Cool. Alan, you have another question?
Yeah, so Christopher, I retired from early childhood education. Any thoughts about doing a child, a picture book or collaborating with someone doing a picture book? I think these would be like
Yeah,
perfect images that would be engaging, or even just the way some of the books now, just having a dinosaur on each page with the name of it, and this way it's
yeah,
a more realistic
absolutely. Yeah,
representation.
totally. I've thought about that. Um, Absolutely. I would absolutely love to do that. I guess the real trick is getting it done. The art part's easy. The funding is the tough thing, right? And the publishing is the tough thing. So you could self-publish a book, but that costs quite a bit of money, last I checked, which I don't have access to right now, unless I get a publisher to pick it up. So yeah, I would totally do that. I just a matter of the not art aspects of it to get it done. That's all.
Back to your dad's who you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Chris, I have a question. Um, it was so wonderful being able to be with you as you explained the picture and why you made those choices and what information you used in order to do those the different pictures. When paleo artists are publishing or they put out a picture, do they also have that something that goes along with it, like a description or something like you just said, like why you did this,
Yeah.
why you did not do that, or
Yeah.
you changed something that was in history, an explanation.
Yeah, usually we do. Like social media is a great example. Like so like Instagram or Blue Sky. Most paleo artists, if we share something like that, we give at least a little, Blue Sky, you have like a limited amount of words to work with, but we try to always give a little background information or fun facts, little snippet, little either definitely the name of the animal, where it's from, the medium that I used to do it, and if I can fit it like a little behind the scenes fun fact about the making of that piece. Yeah, I try to do it it's all engagement, you know? Absolutely. Because again, the paleo art's not just the art, right? It's education too. It's educational art, scientific art. So that's important too.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the picture is completely different than having you tell me about the animal and looking at the picture. It's been quite a treat, amazing. Let's see, Peggy's writing. My grandson Coda, who's attending Drexel in the fall for film and paleo, says hello. You sent an encouraging email to him 10 years ago to say follow your passions. To a dino obsessed kid who is now 20, he never forgot that note. He still has your dino mural photo on his wall from that museum exhibit. Wow, that's amazing. Thank you, Peggy, for sharing
He
that.
did I meet him? Was he there when I was doing it? Because it was during Dino Fest at the Academy. Did I see you guys in person? Oh, okay, great, awesome.
Well, I think that that's a great note to end it on. It's been inspiring. You inspired Coda. You have somebody following in your footsteps there. And I think that you've been also inspired us to look at paleo art and dinosaurs in a different way and understand this place that we call Maryland a little bit better as well. And stay tuned, folks, because we'll be putting up, including Chris's art and the footprints in our new exhibit now that the Ice Age in Maryland is leaving and we're changing things around. So you'll be able to come into the museum and see the footprints and the art in person as well. And visit Dinosaur Park. Do you want to tell people where that is? They don't
It's in
know?
Laurel. Yeah, it's in Laurel, Maryland. If you just go on like Google Maps and type in Dinosaur Park, it's the first one that pops up. And we have open houses on the first and third Saturday of every month. So if you want to come and learn and even help find some of the fossils, the public is allowed to do that.
All right, so you can go and dig with Chris at Dinosaur Park. Thanks everybody for spending your time with us. Thank you, Chris, for sharing your passion, your knowledge, and your expertise with us tonight. It's been wonderful. Stay well, stay curious, stay outside, man, and happy spring. It's great. We'll see you. We'll see you next time for Puritan tiger beetles. Okay. Take care, everybody. Good night.
You know,